Well, my dear friends, I am Cyril Ritchie. I'm one of the WUS alumni, and I will be moderating a good deal of the session this afternoon. I was transferred into moderator after I was originally a speaker, so I'm going to be both. As one of the two known longest surviving WUS alumni, and I greet my elder brother, Tad Mitsui, if you are listening to us, Tad, in Canada, I hope so. As one of those alumni, I opened the Centennial History Panel by saluting those many alumni who have contributed in writing throughout the preparatory process of this Centennial Conference, so well organized by WUS Austria. Some alumni who had wanted to be here in person have unfortunately been prevented by personal, family, health, or professional reasons, and some whom we had hoped to see here in Vienna are sadly recently deceased. In the most recent times, I think particularly of Hans Dahl, of Sornam Pillai Chidambaranathan, universally known as Nathan, both of those being former general secretaries at the international level. I think of Thorvald Stoltenberg, who was mentioned this morning as one of the leaders of the office here in Vienna in 1956 for the Hungarian refugees. And I think of Vien Tiagarajan, who had planned to be here but unfortunately died a few months ago. All of these people and others symbolize the commitment to what in my statement I'm going to call the eternal values of WUS and of humanity. What are those eternal values? And why have they been relevant to WUS and to all of us? There could be many. I select four. Not in a necessary order of priority. Firstly, humanitarian inspiration and feelings, which more recently are known as human solidarity. Secondly, empathy with the oppressed, the dispossessed, the downtrodden, with those subject to discrimination, a grouping more recently perhaps called working for social justice. Third value, the recognition that treating the symptoms and consequences of injustice is essential, but it is insufficient. That we need to work to eradicate the root causes of injustice. That means being political. My fourth category of our eternal values is a commitment to fundamental freedoms of opinion, of speech, of assembly, of association, and a commitment also in that to academic freedom. This commitment, these commitments, require that we as citizens, as NGOs, as students, as teachers, that we stand up and speak up. This may be broadly subsumed as speaking truth to power. Seeking to practice solidarity and to achieve social justice are, of course, in different measures, both humanitarian and political. Over many decades, WUS provided thousands of scholarships to victims of Nazism, of colonialism, of apartheid, of communism, and of dictatorships both military and secular. These scholarship programs were and are both humanitarian and political actions, implicitly condemning and, to a certain extent, countering the systems that produced the victims in the first place. When WUS moved over the years from being primarily humanitarian to attacking the causes of injustice, this meant WUS became identified as an activist, values-based political organization capable of talking directly to and negotiating with governmental ministries, with political parties, with liberation movements. Capable also of elaborating and advocating a political document such as the 1988 Lima Declaration on Academic Freedom and Autonomy of Institutions of Higher Education, a text that is frequently quoted in the admirable WUS Centennial Book that will be presented later in this panel. So, these eternal values of humanity that WUS has experienced and demonstrated surely constitute an explanation as to why so many WUS alumni maintain their attachment to the organization, maintain their respect for their former colleagues, and want WUS to continue and, if possible, to grow again. In this brief statement, I have to firmly resist the temptation to reminisce about individuals. That could go on forever. However, I will speak of two WUS persons known and respected by generations of alumni and who so well encapsulated WUS's eternal values. Firstly, Charlotte Lurig, known to generations as Lo, born in 1903, started to work in WUS Geneva on the 1st of September 1929 and continued working there for over 60 years. Secondly, Georgette Robert, born in 1920, worked for WUS for 38 years, from the 1st of October 1944. Georgette was a well-qualified accountant whose integrity and reliability were standard-setting. I personally was honored to be asked by alumni to pronounce the funeral oration at the temple in Georgette's village in Agnières near Geneva upon her death in 2008. But let me, to close, revert to the irreplaceable Charlotte Lurig, Lo. Some 25 years after I left the WUS Secretariat, Klavs Wulff, whom I'm punishing by having on the panel today, Klavs Wulff, then General Secretary, kindly accorded me a volunteer mandate to sort out the very dusty WUS archives languishing in the basement of the villa in the Chemin des Iris. That work, which I did at weekends for a quite long time, gave me the unique privilege of seeing the immensely meticulous record-keeping by Lo of the scholarship programs of the 1930s and 1940s for victims of Nazism and of the World War. Lo not only kept detailed track of every application and every grant, but she undertook handwritten correspondence with many of the individuals to encourage them in their social and cultural isolation and in their prospects. No wonder that many of the grantees subsequently freely reimbursed part of their scholarship grant so that others might benefit. I have quoted these two iconic staff members because their long service to WUS is unparalleled Their devotion and competence were exemplary, and they illustrate what I have called from the beginning the eternal values of WUS and of humanity. Let us continue to be inspired individually and collectively by these values as we look forward with eager anticipation to the second century of world university service.
We had intended to have Wolfgang Nies of WUS Germany, whose CV you can read in the documents, as an online speaker. That has not been possible, but Wolfgang Benedek is going to read one of his many contributions to the history of WUS. Wolfgang?
Thank you very much, Cyril, and I will also add a bit from other publications. Wolfgang Nies is a kind of WUS historian, and in the forthcoming book, which will be introduced, the Centenary Book, which will be introduced by Bettina in a moment, he has an article about WUS history, and as he could not come personally, I would like to familiarize yourself a bit with the early history of WUS, as we are here in Vienna, and you might ask yourself maybe what were the details or some of the details of this early period. Now, we heard a little bit already today, and as a matter of fact, it was student activists and leaders of student associations in Vienna who approached the World Student Christian Federation in London to help. And then Ruth Haus, Kambitz has already quoted from her book today, came to Vienna and did a kind of fact-finding. And that triggered, as we know, the creation of European Student Relief, which, however, was not created or established in Vienna, but in St. Beatenberg in Switzerland in August 1920, as Wolfgang Nies tells us. And he also points out the important role of this Ruth Haus, who came to Vienna, and she met student leaders here. And I take now her book when she said, I met 5 women, and they represented 5 different student unions: the German National Student Society, 2 Jewish associations, the Socialist Union and the Catholic Student Society, and were the heirs of age-long racial, political and religious antipathies. So these student unions did not like each other, but they were in such a terrible situation that they had to reach out for this help, and that they got through the European Student Relief. And Wolfgang Nies tells us what was the priority in the beginning, and he said the founding resolution of European Student Relief mentioned the following priorities: provision of food, clothing, fuel for heating, books, provision of heated and lighted living space for studying, medications, equipment and materials for training, and assistance for the return of students. And it is reported that the students were so poor at that time that they could not go to the university together. Some, like 2 or 3, lived in one room and were sharing a pair of shoes or a suit, so that they were going in shifts, so to say, to study and then to inform each other about what they had done. European Student Relief, and I think that's interesting also for what later became an important principle in WUS, was based on the principle of self-help. So Wolfgang Nies reports the emphasis was always on the concept of helping people to help themselves. and therefore they helped with finding jobs, working students. They were cutting wood and what have you to survive and to add to the support they got through European student relief. What was that support? In the beginning it was, for example, just a breakfast. So you could apply for being able to get a breakfast at a University of Vienna, and this was something which helped hundreds, if not thousands, of students. By the way, when we looked through the archives of the University of Vienna, we found the decision of the Academic Senate of 1922 when it prolonged a room which European Student Relief was given to do this distribution and other work. And for that purpose, it received a report of the head of European Student Relief on the first 3 years of its activities. And that's also quite interesting. For example, that the University of Vienna at that time just had 11,000 students, of which 4,600, no more, more than half actually, were foreign students. Yeah? They distinguished in 1921 still between foreign students formerly Austrian, 4,600 of the 11,000, and other foreign students, for example, Russian students. And it's interesting that the father of our federal president, Van der Bellen, as we found out in a recent historical piece, was traveling around Europe drawing attention to the situation of Russian students at the time. He was from Estonia at this time. Yeah? So that shows a little bit the situation. And of this more than 10,000 students, only about 10% were women. That might also be interesting. Now let me just carry on. The European Student Relief spread first to 19 and later on to 42 countries in 4 continents. And soon the idea was that we need a different name because it was not anymore European. And so already in 1925, Wolfgang Nies informs the first conference as International Student Service took place. And 4 years later, in a conference in Oxford in 1930, ISS was formally created. And interesting, in the 30s, one of the major tasks of this ISS was actually to help German students expelled from their universities who had to emigrate from Germany. And the figure is given around 5,000, which all received material and non-material help through ISS. And finally, Wolfgang Nies also reports about the transition from European Student Relief, ISS, to World University Service. And that is also interesting, what Cyril just mentioned, this kind of value issues. Yeah? Because in the beginning it was emergency assistance, so it was just giving food and helping out. And here we have figures from different Austrian universities, like a typewriting course was organized in Graz, or a student hostel was set up in Leoben, and so on. So we have these details all here. But obviously some of the members did find that this was not more enough as an approach, because other issues like international understanding and reconciliation was also to be taken into account. And here there was a split that certain parts of European Student Relief, later on ISS, were not ready to accept this wider concept. And in 1950 in Geneva, then World University Service was founded by an electoral committee of 30 people from 20 countries. There was a deliberate change, he writes, with the objective to broaden the scope of its work and to make its worldwide activities and projects in the university field clear in its name. This meant that beyond the purely student approach, it was now understood as an international association that should primarily benefit the entire university community and all its members, from students to professors worldwide. Thank you.
Well, I thank both Wolfgangs for this presentation and for the work put into it. The next speaker we had hoped to have with us is unfortunately not able to, Robin Burns of WUS Australia. She was an officer there in the 1960s and early 70s, and she was on the International Executive Committee. She has been the co-editor of the Centennial Book that we'll be talking about later. She has sent a statement to the history panel, and that will be read out on her behalf by Bettina. And we have Robin on the screen. Bettina.
I'm very pleased to be able to read out Robin Burns' statement on her WUS experience in the mid-1960s to mid-1970s. My warm thanks to the organizing committee for allowing me to contribute to this session on WUS history, and my greetings to participants. I am very sorry that Australian travel restrictions and the 8-hour time difference make it impossible for me to be present with you. My perspective on WUS International is from the global south. And though Australia was and is a wealthy first world country, there is still a substantial gap in lives and livelihoods of the First Nations people whose land we stole. We and New Zealand are also surrounded by Asian and Pacific nations, some still low on international socio-economic scales. During the period when I was most involved with WUS, it was additionally the early post-colonial era and heralded the first and second United Nations development decades. Both internationally and in many national committees, the issues targeted during these decades were significant in framing the WUS work. These are all lenses through which I experienced involvement with WUS. Leaving aside the challenges faced at General Assemblies over the constitution and structure of WUS International, debating the program of action was a major activity. The projects were proposed by national and local WUS committees. Fundraising was carried out predominantly on campus, while students and staff in recipient countries delivered the projects once funded. Human rights as an underpinning philosophy was implicit and in projects to improve the access and experience of students in so-called developing countries. The pursuit of the right to education was evident. The large WUS focus on enabling Black students in apartheid Southern Africa to obtain secondary and tertiary education strongly supports this understanding, as does the large-scale scholarship programs developed for refugees, especially from dictator-led countries in Latin America. Stressed by Julius Nyerere at the 1966 Dar es Salaam Assembly Symposium, in developing countries, university students were a privileged minority and should use their knowledge in service to the poor. Within WUS, there were two approaches to this. The first, involved projects to assist students to apply their knowledge to societal issues and to provide experience in development work. There are many examples from Asian WUS committees at that time. And as the possibility arose for return, refugee students were also assisted to find work that would apply their skills to development. This continues with programs for both foreign and refugee students today. The second activity to promote development, which is also present in the WUS work today, but was to the forefront in the period under consideration, is development education. In 1968, Jules Minder's statement insists that university courses be oriented to societal critique and needs. WUS groups held specific information campaigns, not just around fundraising for particular projects, but about the issues in general. The second development decade call for mobilizing public opinion was directed both within universities and to the wider society in WUS development education activities. A critique of current development approaches was fundamental to many education campaigns. It was a time of great change in universities, from enormous growth in student numbers to demands for greater participation in university government and course design. WUS insisted on the right to education, and that education itself should prepare students for an active role in the development not just of their own society, but internationally. Thus, the seeds of the issues discussed in this centenary conference can be traced through more than 50 years of work of WUS International. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bettina. Thank you. Oh, she's disappeared from the screen. Thank you, Robin. I do hope you might be listening to us, although it is roughly 2 in the morning where you live. And Robin, if you are listening, our warm thanks, and I'm sure I speak for all of us, our very best wishes to you in your role as a carer for your ailing husband. Thank you, Robin, very much. The next speaker is in person. What's your name? Klavs Wulff. General Secretary of International WUS from 1980 to 84. Before that, both on the Executive Committee and running Danish WUS. And subsequent to that, after he returned, he was Regional Director of Central America for IBIS Denmark, IBIS being the name that was changed to in those days and has changed again since. So I am very happy to have a former General Secretary here. I have to say that as a Dane, I think I said it at breakfast, he is probably the only Dane who is totally fluent in Spanish. So, but I invite you to speak in English now.
Thank you very much. I'll make an exception.
You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I had initially to make a confession to all of you. When I first heard about this commemoration, I simply said to myself, celebrating a world network that effectively ceased to exist in the beginning of the 90s, does that make sense? But confronted with good conversations with other WUS veterans from that period, mine convinced me that yes, it does make sense. And I think this meeting in many ways stated this very clearly to me. So I'm very grateful that you didn't know about my initial difficulties and that you continued the invitation, and I'm very happy being here. And there are reasons also for me to see the importance of this meeting. First of all, the impressive publication just out yesterday for some of us, giving witness to long WUS history as important part of the celebration, retaining this essential material for present and future researchers who are keen on going back to the roots of philanthropic engagement for pro-human rights and democracy, and also to better understand the WUS Alliance as an international movement of students and academia who are engaged in WUS early in their lives, and how this involvement often marked their devotion for the same principles during their lives. I would like just to make a brief reference to those who might be interested. Yes, there are studies about this for the moment. There's a 2010 study from Argentina where young researchers are actually looking into WUS as the first and most important networker after the Second World War, meaning that actually the social democratic value and contract to these principles are being continued in many ways. So I think for that reason, also I'm happy to be here and hear more about the document being unfolded later this afternoon. And also, finally, to recognize the consistent existence of 3 WUS committees, Germany, Canada, and Austria, and their tremendous work to further the WUS principles and converting those into awareness building and exercising concrete solidarity from the basic WUS values. I'm very happy to add to this that actually the genesis of WUS Austria in 1983, I'm happily commemorating today. It's not a jubilee day for you, but in a way, yes. And I think it's very important to mark that today as well. The days in the 1982 Assembly of World University Service in Zimbabwe, where it was possible to encourage some of your colleagues to go back to Austria and actually decide to form a new WUS committee. I know it was renewed of an earlier committee, but really a new committee that was established in the middle of a very complex WUS period, but you were extremely fervent to say, we want to stick to the WUS principles, we need that committee. And you have certainly proven, I would say, a lot of perspective and even prophetical thinking, because at that meeting you did indicate to me that you were doing this also because you knew what was going to happen in the Balkans. And there's no doubt that WUS is known not only in Austria, not only in the European community, but even in Scandinavia, we have heard about your enormous impact in the Balkans after the terrible civil war. So just to say that those things made me actually agree to come. And I'm very happy to be here. Now I will return to what I am asked to do, namely to try and reflect a little bit on the history of WUS in what I will call the third wave of WUS, 1970 to 85. A turbulent period in international politics, decolonization of Southern Africa, the battle against old and new emerging dictatorships in Latin America, and in response, the critical involvement of concerned students and academia, both in the North and the South. As a world alliance of WUS committees with small headquarters in Geneva, new pressure was put on the overall WUS principle at all levels. Giving scholarships and shelter in another country and supporting existing national entities from a non-political point of view did not any longer serve the claim for freedom and liberation without corresponding engagement to the strengthening of the political solidarity. In Europe, WUS committees were opened up for this discussion and defined new ways of cooperating with the South. The WUS boat began a new travel in troubled waters, or you could say started a very complicated walk at the razor's edge. Following the Pinochet coup in Chile in 1973, students and teachers were mobilized around WUS committees, in particular in UK, but also in Germany and Denmark, and important initiatives involving universities in Europe and organizations in Chile made both scholarships and returnee programs a reality. It was a time where both the WUS UK and DK set up missions in Chile, hand in hand with the partners there. Concrete here and now solidarity, but with a strong prospective element of political commitment to work in exile for the new future in Chile, and for many with the aim of returning. In the same period, the apartheid policy escalated in South Africa, and the Portuguese dictatorship had not yet given up its colonial grip on its colonies. Danish WUS felt the political stroke in 1969, just after the student rebellion, and soon after defined new principles for Danish WUS in favor of politically motivated solidarity work. The teachers component of the committee decided to leave, and from now on WUS defined itself as the students' organ for concrete solidarity, WUS Denmark. Exactly 50 years ago, WUS DK launched an Africa 71 campaign in support of African liberation movements in Angola, Mozambique and Namibia, and the support in Denmark and response was tremendous, to the point of receiving free professional assistance from architects and engineers from one of the largest building companies in Denmark in order to detail draw free of charge at a major new technical school for MPLA Angola, and participate on-site after this in the same construction together with local partners. This was a tremendous period, and a tremendous period for WUS. It was a linkage between North and South. It was the best we could see of political action in total collaboration with the South, a twinning arrangement of dimensions. In the same period also we had obviously an enormous change of WUS Denmark in terms of a new generation of youth who attached themselves to WUS. So it was a tremendous moment for us. I think what is today the basis of what we call today IBIS Oxfam, because that is what has happened to the organization I was part of from 2016. Going back to the time of 1972, this action I'd mentioned to you, the Africa 71 campaign, worked also in a very favorable political climate in our country because of a social democratic government, seeing this an opportunity to align itself with the emerging youth call in Denmark for fundamental system change in the relationship to the third world, but within the boundaries of non-violent action. As a more proactive foreign policy within NATO, and also a risky edge walk for them, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs told us when the approval was finally through for these programs. Now, gentlemen, we are in the same boat. Again, an example of the influence, the possibility of influencing like-minded governments, not necessarily in favor of revolutionary changes as the youth were, but a social democratic government who saw the opportunities to align themselves with this. Obviously, WUS Denmark at that period was constantly subject to attacks from the right parties in parliament, and therefore as implementing and executing partner, forced to measure every step at the razor's edge and leaving to other members of the international solidarity movement to support military part of the armed struggle in Southern Africa. In order to safeguard the internal programs in South Africa and Rhodesia at that time, the 1982 General Assembly of WUS in Nigeria agreed to a policy of leaving international WUS to administer anti-apartheid programs inside South Africa and Rhodesia, whilst WUS DK took responsibility for the development support of the liberation movement programs, as just described. A division of work likewise essential to partners inside apartheid countries and their condition for their willingness to receive funding through international WUS. I believe that this policy distinction was soon known to the South African intelligence and possibly prevented WUS from being infiltrated later on in the same way as happened to another international organization, UEF. I believe that this summary of the rocking WUS trip in these politically troubled years illustrates also the enormous elasticity within the WUS Global Alliance. Today we define such efforts social and political networking. We didn't call it that time. But now I think the scholars are saying WUS, as I mentioned in studies, are now seen as a pioneer for launching social political networks. And during my time as General Secretary, in particular, leftist movements active in the rapidly growing number of new WUS committees in Latin America now gave rise to political conflicts between the new committees and the European committees, between a new left approach and the revolutionary left in the region. The WUS global network had reached its limits, and either separation or severe weakening of the institution would emerge sooner or later. The possibility to maintain such diverse progressive views within the same alliance came to its limit. I think it's time soon for somebody who are less involved than I have been in this to further study what actually happened. I was elected General Secretary in Managua in 1980 with the Latin American committees abstaining, all of them. So I knew in a split second, as General Secretary newly elected, that I was in for trouble. Regarded by the majority of the Latin American constituency as representative for European New Left, and even worse for me, sometimes labeled as Social Democrat, which I certainly am not. But I mean, that was the way that the revolutionary left in Latin America could describe us from the north. And that was not very positive. My prophecy, unfortunately, came through. The one about not being able to maintain the organization totally intact for up to today. And unfortunately, with the cease of existence in 1991, and obviously contextual circumstances such as the end of the Cold War and the apartheid system in Southern Africa, and with a following drastic decline in funding, also contributed to the unfortunate closure. And therefore I'm saying today we don't have the total clearance of what actually happened. I'm just giving you my instant administration in the center of this crisis for this occasion. Today I am convinced, and that might be my second conviction today, that we at that time could have and should have engaged with the organization opposing the majority line in WUS in another way. I think there could have been, in that moment, another serious dialogue with Latin America. But we did not have the conditions, and in the historical view, you have to understand that when we were confronted with very, very strong radical demands at the institutional level, it was very difficult for us not to respond with the same kind of discourse and polemic as they did. But today, so many years away from what had happened, I would like to reach out to all of you and say that I formed part of the history. I was part of the problems. Whether I have been part of the solution is another matter. But at least today I can somehow say to you openly, after many, many more years in development assistance, that this moment was critical, and I'm sure this was the moment where the cord broke in terms of maintaining up to today an international organization, WUS, as it was meant to be from 1920. Counterfactual history is always a tempting thing at this moment, and therefore I could have continued now to say what would have happened if WUS still was here. But I don't think this is the right thing to do for the moment. I would rather end my intervention by returning to the definition of WUS International over the years as a very timely and useful network that inspired many individuals, both in the North and the South. Sufficiently round and flexible network or association, not a powerful global NGO, a structure that invited so many to exercise their enthusiasm and contribute to important causes. A multiplying effect that gave impetus for many to carry forward this WUS apprenticeship to other parts of their life. The Jubilee document is for me a living example of this fact. As I mentioned earlier, it is very interesting that academicians now have initiated studies about WUS in the history, specifically on how its global network fomented political and social capital building among individuals and partners over time, and used the capital when getting involved in other networks. This is the continuation, a living continuation of WUS, which I think is inevitably important for all of us, and I think it's good that some scholars would like to go further into this. As WUS, my notes. As WUS should always stand for solidarity and concrete action, I believe that the 3 remaining musketeers here present, WUS committees in Europe and Canada, ought to unite now around the plight of actual burning issues which has been mentioned here, like the organs. As an old operator in World Universal Service and other organizations, I think you have a fantastic moment now to unite and really spearhead what is coming up in this meeting as innovative programs to protect and support the academia inside Afghanistan and outside Afghanistan. And I could only see this as a golden opportunity for U3 to revive realistically a network between U3, which might spurt into some more than U3. I could imagine that even my old organization in Denmark, now called IBIS Oxfam, could be tempted to join you. And many other issues are unfortunately on the horizon now that could opt for action. I have to mention some former collaboration, country of collaboration. Nicaragua, for example. Latin America is not mentioned so much on the horizon of denial of human rights, but I can assure you that the situation in Nicaragua is as bad as it was prior to the civil war in 1979. And it's something that should call attention to us. One of WUS's founders over there, an old academician, is today, who actually managed to get us the access to WUS, to Nicaragua in 1980 to celebrate our annual assembly, is today in the forefront of spearheading a critical debate and opposition towards the government by the age of 87. So the WUS spirit is still around, and I think it merits also, because of our history, a concerted understanding of the enjailment of not only academicians but politicians. There is an election in November, and that election is now barred from having any kind of opposition present. They're all enjailed. They are enjailed. Every of the 7 contenders from the opposition are all now enjailed, together with a number of former WUS academicians. So I think there are many issues around. I will hope that you would take up this baton, and I hope you will make sure that the recipients are, as usual, in WUS in the cockpits when any new travel is being made. I wish you all the best for the voyage that you are in for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Klaus. That sets us on the road that I think we will possibly many of us will want to go on, of expanding into the future. The last speaker from the set panel is Almir Adi Kovacevic, currently Executive Director of WUS Austria, working in Graz. He's an expert in education management, which I should think is quite useful for WUS. And he was studied in Sarajevo and Graz and took part in many of management trainings at more than 30 universities around the world. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. When I was asked by my colleague, Maria, she's somewhere here, to join to this panel about WUS Austria, I was, and I'm actually still not sure, should I be happy or worried to join the panel. We're talking about history, actually, and I'm actually only 51. As you can see, I came from Sarajevo in 1992. Actually, I escaped the war, and I popped up in Austria somehow. And I was asked, "Are you a refugee?" And I wasn't sure what that means. And I started to think what that means, because I'm student, I'm Adi Kovacevic, I'm from Bosnia. But I really didn't know what refugee means. And I didn't learn it here, because we got the status of so-called de facto refugee. the Austrians, I'm Austrians, proud Austrians now, are very creative by introducing the new models of supporting the people who escape. So I became this so-called de facto refugee, and I was happy that my girlfriend met Wolfgang, and he invited me to stay in his house. And spending the days in his house put me into opportunity to go through his library. And first what I saw from WUS was some WUS publications, colorful, black and white, about activities, I don't know what was that, in Africa. And I was going through these publications, seeing Wolfgang happy with plenty of people in Africa, mostly in Africa. And I told, when I grow up, I want to be Wolfgang. So traveling around, spending the time with happy people, and being happy, actually. And as plenty of my colleagues pop up in Graz on this time, people who have been working for WUS Austria, which get used to help people in need, and especially students in need abroad, act, and they give us opportunity to set up the Club of Bosnian Students in Austria, and this club became somehow also the hub of WUS Austria. So I was somehow connected and attached to WUS, not even knowing it, that my professional and also private life will be attached to, with WUS Austria for some years. Somehow in the middle of the war, Wolfgang invited me to take a part on first fact-finding mission to Sarajevo, still in the war. And I was not really sure what fact-finding mission means, but I'm still not sure who was braver or more crazy, Wolfgang to invite me to go back 3 years after I escaped, or myself saying yes. And it was 1995, we survived. And actually, from 1996 until now, I'm on different ways, but I'm employed with WUS Austria. So next month, Veronica, I have to celebrate 25 years being on the paying list of WUS Austria. But if I want to get retired from WUS Austria, I think we have to learn from the history, and we have to think what we will do in the future. And being present today on this conference, unfortunately I was late with my colleague yesterday. I was driving from Bosnia because last year I got a job in Bosnia. I'm running one big EU project in Bosnia. We've been talking about this conference since 7-8 years, Veronica? 7-8 years. And some 3 years ago, we really started to discuss concrete steps. And last year or 2 years ago, I thought that will never happen. But I'm really happy being with you guys today, feeling not only the history, big history, and thank you guys for inviting me to the panel, but also feeling the power and feeling the possibility to take this history on the way to the future. Today we heard a lot about what was WUS, different kind of WUS doing in the last 40 years. And it's actually plenty of things which has been done, like a lot of policy documents, a lot of instruments which are being developed out of these policy documents, a lot of the academic, but also field works, like supporting persons, supporting systems, supporting education. It's not easy. Being an activist, but also running for the projects, being partly consultancy, being partly humanitarian worker is not an easy task. And we feel it also in WUS Austria since years. It's not possible to have all these tasks combined because it's simply not able, you are not simply able to be activist, to talk what you would like to talk and to run for the money. So this is actually some kind of the cycle which we have to break somehow, and to think, what can we again become network? We talk about this today, Kamit. We're talking about this last 20 years, I think. But I think having all these people and all these institutions, institution history and memories, we have to find a way to use it also for the future. We from WUS, we are a very small team, and I really would like to use this opportunity to thanks to small, brave, crazy, skilled, and very social responsible team from my colleagues in Graz. Not only for organizing this great event, but doing this great job in the last 10, 15 and more years. I think it's very important for our future to decide what we can do and what we would like to do. Some years ago, we had the time, opportunity, and the money to think about our future of WUS Austria. And we clearly defined that we had different steps in our development. Like we didn't been there when you guys been talking about policy development and Lima Declaration. We've been too young for this. But we start with humanitarian aid, pure money, focused on education, supporting first people, meaning professors and students and the systems. Then we moved to stabilization of the systems with different projects trying to stabilize existing structure, existing people. And then third, and I think we are still in this development phase, we are improving the system. But I think sometimes having this crisis, you have to come back also, but to take your also to humanitarian aid, not be afraid about humanitarian aid, not being afraid again about stabilizing system, and not being afraid going back to the development of the system, but using the history, experience, and also people in our network to do it this time much better. And I think we can do it better, even we did it very good. And I would be really happy to be here in 30 years to see what happened with all of us and with our idea about right to education. Thank you very much for being able to be with you guys.
Thank you, Adi, very much. We will all put in our diaries an appointment in 30 years' time, at least. Now we have two presentations to finish off this history panel before we have a social history event. And the first is the presentation of the WUS Centenary publication, which will be done by Bettina Schmidt. She was with Robin Burns, the co-editors of the book, with others that you will certainly mention as part of the editorial team. Bettina there's a long CV in the documentation, but I was very struck by the number and variety of universities mentioned. Mainz, Zimbabwe, Nijmegen, Johannesburg, and the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in Port Elizabeth. And I know that I am the only one in the room who attended the WUS General Assembly in Nijmegen. You don't even know there was one. 1957, some of you weren't even born. The WUS General Assembly took place in the castle in Nijmegen, and it was quite an event. The Dutch are wonderfully hospitable. So, Bettina, I turn over to you to present the Centennial Book, thanking you already now for your immense work with Robin over these last years.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me this space, and I will use this ambiente because I think it suits my task, which I have, and I'm proudly able to present to you the 100 years of World University Service International, 1990 to 2020 +1. Why do I do something like that? Stick through nights with Robin Burns. I want to mention some more who also stuck through nights, and perhaps mention them only because I think else the list would get too long. There is Carola from the office of WUS Germany. There was Heike doing the layouting, and there are many others more, but I want to mention this team of also Petra, 4 women practically, again, giving birth to this book. And why was it so important for me to do it and to get involved into this? The one was that for me, it's a great part of the history of WUS is not in the digital age. And I really want to say thank you to all those who contributed to WUS. And also, I love listening to people's stories. So I had the opportunity to link this digital gap, to fill the digital gap, and enjoy the pleasure of telling stories. And that's why I could work on this book. But why should I do something for WUS? The background why I would do something for WUS was really in my family history and the importance of education. I grew up in South Africa in the rural areas where we were the only white persons, and we were privileged in education. Apartheid denied the majority of South Africans access to education. Nelson Mandela and others were on Robben Island, and we could see the impact it had on society, and due to the protest of our family against apartheid, we were deported from South Africa, and since then active against apartheid. And of course, when you get back to Germany, there's an anti-apartheid movement, but because I had experienced this hardship on education, I luckily entered WUS office in Wiesbaden and could join the team on different projects and as volunteer. Also, I didn't know that when Kambitz Gawami asked me to work on a book with Wolfgang Nies on 60 years of WUS Germany, that actually I was practicing to prepare me for the book on 100 years. Kambitz, thank you for letting me learn this lesson. And also then, at that time, I already had problems with documents like this. They are very thin, yeah? But it was due to the printing situation at those times. And today, they can be a bit thicker. But I had the advice to stay under 400 pages, which luckily, with the support of all, we managed. Now, I would like to, after these words of introduction, I would just like to give you an insight into this publication. And in the table of content, you will find so many persons who are present here, but others who also send us their message in the book, like Ricardo Lagos, who was the former president of Chile. Then we have greetings from Richard Taylor, congratulating us and him providing, contributing to WUS International. Then we have our 3 offices, and I hope very much that what they write, what they contributed here will, and also what we heard at this conference, would give an impetus for their future work and will inspire them for the next 50 years. There is always one wording that comes about, this is WUS in action. WUS motivating self-help. WUS being a network of persons seeking help, providing help, and guidance. And WUS has always been in action, but WUS has also had crises. And due to that, we will go through history in this book, and you are welcome to read it. And again, I want to also thank Cyril Ritchie, who was from the start one of the patrons for this book, and especially also Robin Burns for sticking through everything what we have been going through. And yeah, here you see Wolfgang Nies, who also unfortunately couldn't come. And all people who dealt with me on this book, they heard the information. I always said, please send photos. Some people won't read the 370 pages, but they will look at the pictures. And they will then tell the story of these certain events which they could participate. Here, Thorvald Stoltenberg, you will see now repetitions. You say, aha, déjà vu, I've heard about this, and I've seen about that, and this is good. And in August, Peter Fensom passed away, and so we're very happy also to have his document. Yes, and I want to thank all here who contributed to the book and say thank you. We have this online version, and it is, as in many projects we have with WUS, we have lovely ideas and we can manage a certain way, but for you all to know, we still have to go on a fundraising tour with a van through the world and raise funds so that we can have a printed version. And it is just something very valuable to have, just like the rebuilding book. So let's see how we can raise the funds within the WUS family and community. Thanks so much.
Putting this book together, as I said, Robin Burns was the co-editor with Bettina, and on the editorial board there was Alan Phillips, whom we're coming to in a different context in a moment, and Alan Phillips from the UK and Clive Nettleton from South Africa, who was in the WUS International Secretariat. It's an immense achievement, and we are all looking forward to having it in our hands in heavy book form. And I know that there'll be more work on this to be done very soon. So thank you again, Bettina. The last presentation is by Alan Phillips, and I saw him on the screen some time ago, so I hope he's still there. Alan Phillips is coming in on, there he is. Hello, Alan.
Hello.
Oh, good. General Secretary of WUS UK from 1973 to 81, and then moved on. It's very interesting what people move on to from WUS. He became Deputy Director of the British Refugee Council, and then Director of the Minority Rights Group and other activities with the Council of Europe. But in addition, Alan, personal thanks again to you for your role in the Centennial Book Editorial Committee. But this presentation will be by Alan Phillips in regard to the WUS website. And I turn over to you, Alan, because this is yet another monumental piece of work, which has certainly kept you up at night once or twice. And I ask you now to make your presentation.
Thanks very much, Cyril, and thank you and the conference organizers for giving me this opportunity to make a presentation. It's really a delight to be back with the WUS family after so many years. As we know, the conference is celebrating the immense contribution that so many people made within WUS and have made to providing education to the vulnerable, to refugees and those who suffered discrimination. I just found one particular point this morning I thought was interesting that I wanted to draw attention to, was highlighting the importance of WUS's work today. The provost of the Central European University stated that the important work of WUS is not well known. This was also implied, I think, by Dr. Kambitz, as the WUS committees are fully occupied. I know myself from back in the 1970s of how busy we were with important operational work to be able to go out and share past work that had been done. When WUS's work on the Lima Declarations and its 4-book series on academic freedom was known by Robert Quinn of Scholars at Risk, he said this morning that it had informed and made their work more effective. That seems to me a really valuable example of what we have been able to do in affecting and influencing others. Now, the new WUS website has been developed to respond to these important observations, to facilitate networking and enabling many involved with WUS, past and present, to share their experiences and insights on WUS and its programs. Of course, I am delighted, we are delighted to launch the new WUS website today to meet some of the needs, to mark this centenary, and maybe to be part of the development of WUS institutional memory and indeed the growth of WUS itself again. If I can say, this is one presentation where everybody can look at their mobiles, their tablets, their laptops without any embarrassment. I won't be offended, I'll actually be delighted. I do have one caveat. You must be looking at the new WUS website that is found on wus.org.uk. That's wus.org.uk. The website is dynamic. It's an extraordinary set of historical critiques, but just as importantly, it links into the work of WUS today, including this conference. This features on the homepage of the website alongside galleries and photos, and indeed you will be familiar with some of the navigation buttons soon, I hope. It will also provide a direct link into the final conference declaration, report and papers, as well as direct links into the activities of WUS in Germany, in Austria and Canada. It also has the video you saw during the coffee break today. An important focus of the website is WUS as an international movement with a set of independent national committees. Therefore, the site doesn't attempt to duplicate what the national committees are doing, but takes you straight there. My own career has been working with the most vulnerable, including refugees and minority communities, including the Roma. I have retired now and left me with the substantial time that Cyril Ritchie implied needed to create this site and input so many rich contributions. Indeed, it took me back to my very early days, maybe returning to childhood almost as you get older, when I was a physics graduate and a systems designer, perhaps a long way from the latter part of my career. But maybe that's a skill that I have been able to put to some effect anyway for WUS, because wus.org.uk, I hope, is going to become a focal point, an easily accessible one-stop shop for information on the work of all WUS committees, past and present worldwide, with the archives that are already there being a treasure trove for research. I know that it's already been invaluable to important research in the UK. Sadly, in 2008, WUS UK, then called Education Action International, was too ambitious. It had overextended its programming and it became insolvent. I was alerted to that a year later by Sarah Hayward, who with Nigel Hartley was one of my successors at WUS UK. We saved the archives and placed them at Warwick University. To mark the centenary, the Modern Records Centre at Warwick University have digitized these WUS physical records, including, I think, something like 45 annual reports. And copies of WUS Action have also been digitized. And you can see them online now under the archives. Here you will see links to where archives of WUS are found in many countries all over the world. And indeed, once the International Secretariat is digitized, its International Secretariat, maybe it's its archives is digitized in Canada, I think that will also be immensely valuable. And certainly I would want us to have a direct link into it. The new archive has had many beneficial effects already, leading to an international symposium on the WUS Chile Refugee Scholarship Program, and to Professor Ribeiro de Menezes setting up a research project on this program. All of this is outlined under the section WUS UK. The research on the WUS Chilean refugee program took a team of us to Chile in 2016 and 2018 to listen to the reflections of former WUS award holders. This certainly inspired the section in the website on personal reflections, where many involved with WUS have written their reflections. They are also, you will have seen, in the book that Bettina so eloquently described. These are, as I say in the book, WUS at 100. The plan is that in 2022, more reflections, especially those from WUS refugee award holders, should be added, making this a living website. Importantly, we are able to present the contributions to the Centenary book in a very accessible format. It can be dipped into and out of from mobiles, tablets, and laptops. It is no substitute for a hard copy, a printed book that we all know that we want, but it can be viewed online by a wide audience through search engines like Google. On the website and in the book, after the welcome, the articles are ordered geographically and thematically, each tagged for easy access, e.g. those about refugees could be read consecutively. The chronological order can also be followed by clicking at the end of each article, or indeed you can tap the tag at the bottom where you see a particular decade, and you can review the work of WUS in a particular decade. The WUS site, wus.org.uk, is work in progress. It will be updated, and I'm sure there will be some corrections needed, while new articles will be added to make this a dynamic website. It needs to be relevant for years to come for students, academics, students, as well as the WUS family and other NGOs. So I'd ask you, please share this widely. It may help the expansion of new committees and encourage greater interest in the work that WUS is doing globally, but also in the 3-4 national committees that are still existing and doing important work. Finally, I'd like to thank Laxeri for inspiring me by pointing out about 18 months ago the value of using the internet more effectively for WUS. To thank also Bettina for reminding me that if you want a job done, do it yourself. Do read her article where she puts down her experience of going to the WUS Germany office. I'd also like to thank WUS Austria, who have already linked this website with theirs. The conference element is there. If you tap the WUS Centenary website, it'll take you straight to this. And of course, to the book's editorial board, especially Robin Burns, for her inspiration dedication and diligence. Well, I do hope you'll enjoy looking at the WUS website as you plan your evening ahead, and when I think I may be needing to catch up with some of that sleep I've missed over the last year. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Alan. You have done a job that's unbelievably extensive, and we are all grateful to you. And those who are not here will be doubly grateful when they're able to get access. So thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.
There are two other interventions before I close the session. Firstly, Camby's chair of WUS Germany.
Yes, thank you. We have been informed from many speakers about the positive impacts of WUS in education, in politics, and many other fields. But there is something else, the impact of WUS. I give you only two examples from many other examples. There have been a person coming from Namibia to London in exile. And he also was representing his organization, his party, the liberation organization SWAPO. And he got this WUS scholarship. And the person who was responsible to take care of him on behalf of WUS, a young lady, is nowadays his wife. And the young Namibian studying in London is nowadays the president of the parliament of Namibia. The second example is a journalist from El Salvador. He was going to exile in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. And the same happens to him. And when he returned to El Salvador some years later, he became the president of the state of El Salvador. So you see, WUS is also a kind of a platform for marriages. And therefore, many, many couples around the world got the chance to meet at WUS as an organization, as a platform, as WUS events. And maybe Klaus can add something to this in a private conversation. He knows. Strictly private, because I know his wife before she comes to be the wife of Klaus, and she was also one of the pillars of WUS International Secretariat in Geneva before, and therefore you see WUS has a lot of different impacts in the personal development and the personal affairs of many, many of the old and good and young WUS activities. And maybe around the students here, you will tell us in 10 or 20 years what happens afterwards of this conference. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, and thank you and WUS Germany for all you have done in getting this show on the road. The penultimate remarks will be from Wolfgang Benedict.
Thank you very much. I'm fearing that the last suggestion of Cambys is a bit difficult because we did not look sufficiently into the gender balance of the students. They're mainly female. But anyway, Cambys has already opened to the next program point, which will be a nice way socializing, but also hearing some anecdotes about WUS from different old hands, and this together with some music. So I think you will enjoy this very much. After we have traveled now in this panel from oral history to digitalization, we see that we went a long way, and we were continuing this way in the next panel. But before we break, I just wanted to inform you about the process of the drafting of our Vienna Declaration on the right to quality education, because some people rightfully asked, what is the process? Now, we have finalized thanks to a number of inputs, the so-called fifth edition of it, and this will be sent out electronically to everybody now, so that you have a chance to look at it if you want over the night. And tomorrow I would suggest that the working groups devote a little time at least to look at the section which is related to the working group, if they have anything which is missing or which needs a little change. It would be difficult to have now significant changes after we have sent it out to you for several times to make your contributions. But if there is something which can be taken into account without too much effort, then we are still open until the last moment to do it. And then in the second session tomorrow, it will be tabled. A final discussion can take place, and then hopefully we'll adopt it by consensus. So this is the process regarding the declaration. This ends the work from my side, and I can only thank the panel and its chair, Cyril Ritchie, for a very interesting and informative session. Thank you.
My dear colleagues, and now my dear friends, you may have noted that my whole approach to this history panel was focused on alumni. I conceived my remarks particularly thinking of the alumni, and so as I close the panel, I am rising in honor of the alumni present and the hundreds not present who would have liked to have been here, and to those who cannot for the reasons that I mentioned at the beginning. I'm going to close with a quote from an alumnus. And this quote comes from the Managua Assembly in 1980. The president of WUS then was Ian Wright from the UK. And after giving his presidential report, as each president had to do, he closed by saying, making reference to the many ups and downs and ins and outs that WUS has experienced, as all our NGOs do. And his last words were the following, last words of his report. We in WUS have managed to keep alive in our activities, in our international meetings, our communications with one another. We have kept alive the essential spirit of WUS. I mean by that common commitment to eradicate injustice, oppression, and deprivation. That spirit of comradeship and tolerance, that persistent optimism and enthusiasm, which are the roots of our greatest single asset, WUS's genuine and practical internationalism. So I am deeply moved by those marks made today. They illustrate again the eternal values that I spoke of at the beginning, eternal values that have bound us and that will bind us. I invite you to follow Wolfgang to the social history part.